Jensen and the Lady of the Manor by Jules Sanderson. Read by Jules Sanderson. Part 3. On the front of my bicycle is a wicker basket. It looks like it could have been made pre-war, and in that is a small leather pouch containing the Wi-Fi disruptor I use to take down Wi-Fi networks. It's something I discovered quite by accident when trying to install some Wi-Fi equipment on my model train layout of Crewe railway station. Now I know what you're thinking. It's a very ambitious project. Anyway, I had hoped my modifications might work, but all they did was take down the Wi-Fi networks nearby. Most inconvenient. Yet, most helpful in my current occupation. My skills as a burglar are not so much physical as technical. As I surveyed the cottage in the distance and confirmed it really was the one described by Mrs. Sinclair, I enjoyed one of the sandwiches I'd made before cycling through the hedgerow-lined lanes, the few miles to the address provided. This pleasant cottage was the one to be burgled, and in the living room I could make out the very painting I'd been commissioned to appropriate. Steal didn't seem the right word, as the item rightfully belonged to Mrs. Sinclair and her idiot of a husband. My task was more of a repossession. I surveyed the scene carefully from my vantage point, the crest of a hill, until satisfied I'd be able to effect entry without being seen. I decided there was no way to approach the building under cover, but if I were challenged, I could claim to be a birdwatcher curious about the two grey-breasted moolies nesting in the hawthorn in the garden. I cycled up to the gate, pushed it open, and put my bike aside, making sure it wasn't visible from the road. The place looked deserted. No vehicles. I took the leather pouch and turned on the Wi-Fi disruptor. Even if there was a camera system, it would have gone down long before I would have been discernible. I walked confidently up to the front door and pressed the bell. No answer. Good. I waited a moment longer and then walked briskly to the rear of the house. I took the glass cutter from my pocket and then, ignoring the back door, which would likely have a contact breaker alarm, found a handy window. I removed a section of glass, reached in and opened the window, then stepped through it. Moments later, I was in the small house and made my way to the living room. I happened to glance at the back door and noticed the profusion of locks. This particular shady character seemed to enjoy his security. A red light blinked from a sensor in the hallway and confirmed my presence to a network deaf to its cry for attention. In the living room was the painting, just as Mrs. Sinclair had said. I never really got abstract art. This thing looked like the stain one might usually cover with a painting. I removed it carefully from the frame, rolled it up, and slid it into a sleeve I'd made for it. I checked the room to make sure I'd not touched anything or done anything that might betray me. Then, satisfied I was in good shape, I retraced my steps. I left the cottage and retrieved my bicycle from the hedge. Turning off the Wi-Fi disruptor as I cycled away, I remember thinking, that was a little too easy. A light mist hung over the countryside as I cycled home, a welcome cover of my retreat in the failing light. The thought of calling Mrs. Sinclair was swiftly dismissed. We'd agreed such contacts would not withstand unwelcome attention should the shadow of suspicion ever fall on us. Instead, once home, I settled down to a glass of Croft Original sherry with a sense of a job well done. Mrs. Sinclair and I would have our scheduled meeting in a couple of days on a public footpath at a well-known but generally deserted beauty spot a little out of town. It was with a satisfied feeling that I let the dry cream sherry move me towards sleep that evening as I studied the plan of the Crewe Arms Hotel, an interesting addition I would soon be adding to the layout of the model railway, which was now gradually taking over my living room. At the risk of disappointing you, though, I'm going to skip over some of the details of this lovely old building. Perhaps we can return to discuss it in detail later. The 1837 hotel really has such spectacular architecture, but for the sake of brevity, we'll have to sacrifice that pleasure for now. Instead, I'll tell you how I chuckled to myself, remembering how Mrs. Sinclair, that rather odd woman with whom I now shared an unlikely partnership, had insisted I wear those red panties as punishment for my intrusion on her privacy. The discovery of the document titled "The 10 Tasks Required for the Feminization of Your Partner" was something she felt required punishment, and in this case the punishment did fit the crime. I poured the last glass of sherry and retired to bed, feeling quite confident in the outcome of our little adventure. The following morning I woke up and made my usual English breakfast. I was in a light mood and felt the joy of the late summer permeating my body. I know I'm not the first to say this, but since adopting a life of crime, I had to admit to myself I felt more alive than I had in any of the days I'd spent working in my professional capacity. Surprising as it may seem, actuarial reports about the home insurance industry lack the intensity of experience I've come to enjoy as I step into someone's house at 3 a.m. and leave a few kilos heavier. Such were my musings as I cleared the table and contemplated the coming day. Perhaps I'd finally make some progress on the Crew Arms Hotel. This happy thought flashed across my mind, only to be interrupted by a firm-sounding knock on my apartment door. It was a Sunday morning, so I was a little puzzled. Perhaps it was some religious sect come to recruit me into their cult. I would have some fun with this, I thought as I opened the front door and found myself staring directly into the face of what was unmistakably a woman police officer.